Hello everyone, I'm bringing you a video today looking at some Australian kit. We haven't had a video on the channel looking at Australian kit for a little while, so I thought it was about time. What we have here is a set of the Australian M1988 equipment. This is the initial issue, the green version of the equipment. Of course, this would fairly rapidly be replaced with the disruptive pattern camouflage version of the equipment using the disruptive pattern camouflage we can see on the uniform here. And this is of course one of the trials versions of the disruptive pattern camouflage uniform. A note about the mannequin here, this isn't set up to represent anything in particular. It's not referenced from photographs. It just allows me to show the equipment to best effect. Obviously, we're going to talk about the details of the equipment, how it's set up here on the mannequin. In this video, in part 2, we'll be looking at the various components in more detail. Unfortunately, photographs of this equipment in use are relatively few and far between. So if anyone has any, they'd be willing to share. I'd be very interested to see. And obviously there is an email address down below if you'd like to get in touch and share photographs showing this equipment in use. It wasn't in use for all that long because it was fairly rapidly replaced with the disruptive pattern camouflage version of the equipment in the early 1990s. So from that point of view, a short-lived set of equipment, but a stepping stone from the preceding M1956 equipment, the modified M1956 equipment, which Australia had been using since the latter days of the Vietnam War, right the way through into the 1980s when this equipment appeared. And it is a modification of those existing components, as we'll see as we look at all of this in more detail. So looking at the front of the mannequin here, you can first of all see the waist belt here. And this is a modification of the M1956 design. It still has eyelets running around, as we'll see in more detail in the second part in this little series. Now has a Nexus type buckle at the front here, as you can see, which adjusts on this side, sewn on this side, and that does of course mean that this is both easier to unfasten and fasten, but also gives you the adjustment for this whilst it's being worn, so it can be worn over different layers of clothing, and there's a bit of adjustment there in the waist even while the equipment's being worn. So you have that there, of course made in plastic. Originally it would have been this sort of olive drab colour. This side of the buckle here is oxidised to this grey colour, but originally it would have been more of an olive drab, as you can see on this side of the buckle here. And obviously we'll have a look at this in more detail in part 2, as I say. Coming down from the shoulders here, you have the suspenders, and you can see here we have loops on these, and these allow for the attachment of equipment. And you have here the compass or first aid pouch, copied from the US M1956 equipment. Obviously basically the same as that used with previous designs of equipment carried forward, and that's been clipped up onto the suspenders here just to show you the function of these loops on the shoulder sections of those here. These then come down to a 1-inch strap here with a plastic D-ring attached to each of these, and then there are actually straps on the back of the pouches which loop up through these, and then using a plastic buckle tighten off to support the pouches directly from the suspenders. Prior to this, the ammunition pouches used the separate supporting strap which clipped up to the suspenders, and the suspenders hooked onto the belt. So basically, per the US M1956 equipment, this modifies that considerably, and we'll see that more clearly in part 2. I'll be able to show you the detail of that. The straps on the pouches are very long, and my thanks to those who advised previously. These have been taped up out of the way, as you can see here. Again, not specifically based on any period photographs, just taped up out of the way to show you one way of doing this. And as I say, thank you for the advice from those who were advised on this previously. The two ammunition pouches here, you can see, are a large version of the Australian modified M1956 pouches, and you can see they maintain the features from those pouches. You have a loop on the side here which would take a slide keeper or the spoon of a grenade, a strap there. I should note that's with the initial design, the M1956 design. It was rare for Australians to carry grenades on the outside of pouches, but that's what this element of the design was originally for on the US equipment, and it's been copied across here, as you can see. They close with a quick release, which we'll see when we start moving the mannequin around. It'll be a little clearer to see. The nylon edging around the side there, they're otherwise made of a cotton canvas material, and the straps on the sides can of course also be used to carry a toggle rope, which had been a common thing to do since the introduction of M1956 equipment into Australian service. Very common throughout the Vietnam War and then post-Vietnam, and we have that here as well, using the same system with the two webbing straps on each side attached with a press stud, and that allows you to easily carry the toggle rope on the side of the pouch or slung across the pouch as we have here. We'll start moving this around now and have a look at some of the other details. Looking at the right hand side of the mannequin here, if I move the arm out of the way, we can not only have a look at the additional components on the belt here, we can also have a more detailed look at the ammunition pouch here. And this design is basically carried forward from the preceding designs of equipment, and we'll talk more about that in part 2. But you can see some of the basic details here. We have a stiffened front. On the outside here we have a government arrow stamped on the green canvas, as you can see there, and we have the quick release fastening here, which is carried across directly from the preceding designs. So that's the ammunition pouch there. Round on the hip we have the canteen cover, canteen carrier, as you can see here, and this is basically a development of the M1956 design. The Australians introduced hanger hooks to the back with their initial modified version of M1956. That was then simplified in the early 1970s, and production changed slightly to remove the vertical stitching down the front, which had initially been copied across. And then for this design we've had a further modification with a section of webbing sewn onto the front here, and this allows for a component with a single slide keeper on the back, such as the compass first aid pouch, to be carried on the front of this, so you can actually slide a single slide keeper through that and allows something to be attached onto the outside of the canteen cover there. Just an interesting development of the design, again with a nylon binding material around the edge there, and otherwise made of a fairly fine green canvas, as you can see. The bottle or canteen carried inside is a copy of US practice, or more properly Canadian practice. The Canadians introduced this type of plastic canteen before the US did, but it is synonymous with US practice, and it's where it was copied from for Australian service. This is made of a sort of forest green colour plastic rather than the olive drab seen in both Canadian and US canteens, but otherwise it's basically exactly the same. And this particular example is dated the 1960s date on this, as I remember, but they are seen with later dates as well, and the canteen still in use at this period. And this is nested inside a metal cup, which is carried down inside the carrier, of course. You can also see the side profile of the field pack, or bum pack in Australian slang, round on the back there, of course butt pack in US service, and that's carried on the back of the belt and supported directly by the suspenders. And we're going to have a look at that in a bit more detail now. Looking at the back of the mannequin here, you can see the field pack carried round on the belt. It attaches to the belt with slide keepers. You also have positions on the side for carrying more equipment clipped onto the side of the field pack. And this is basically a development of the M1961, which had then been brought into Australian service with their modified version of the M1956 equipment. And then this has been further modified from that design. It's pretty similar, but there are various detail differences. At the back here we have D-rings, as you can see, which the straps on the suspenders come down, loop through, and then hook back up to, well, passed back through a plastic buckle here, and then they've been taped off to keep the loose ends from flapping around, as I say. These again would have been olive drab originally. They're actually now more of a grey colour. They've sort of oxidised over time. So the straps are integral to the suspenders at the back, whereas at the front the straps are on the ammunition pouches. So it's an interesting element of the design, and we'll see that more clearly in part 2, of course. So they loop down through these D-rings and back up to the plastic buckle here in order to support the field pack on the back of the belt. So that's a departure from preceding designs. Obviously this could actually be used with the preceding version of the suspenders. You could hook the hooks through these rings if necessary. So it's sort of back compatible in that regard with the preceding designs of equipment. Just an interesting point to note here. You have a window for putting details on here on a piece of card. You could slide that in there. The details of the person this has been issued to could be written onto a piece of card and shown here. The carrying handle at the top. And one thing to note with this is that the straps are now of 1 inch thickness, 1 inch width, which is wider than they had been on the preceding design, and they're made of a nylon or a polyester material. They're made of a plastic material. The ends have just been melted over, which is an advantage of that sort of material. The body, however, is made of this green canvas. You can see we again have that bright green nylon edging around the sides there. You can see here more clearly how the colour of the plastic components used on this equipment would originally have been something closer to this olive drab colour, and you have these 2 small nexus buckles here for opening the main flap, and this is a departure from previous designs, makes it a bit easier to get into this. Previously you just had buckles that the straps looped through. On the bottom here you have a plastic analogue of those for the carrying straps, which are fitted to the bottom of this, which would allow a rolled load to be carried underneath the bottom of this if required. And you can see we again have the government arrow on the centre of the main flap there. So that's the field pack on the back here. We'll move this around now to have a look at the left hand side. Looking at the left-hand side here, there's not a huge amount more to see. We have, in typical Australian fashion, a second water bottle or canteen carried around on the hip here, and this is in a less heavily worn version of the carrier here, as you can see, but has all the same features. And then we have the ammunition pouch around towards the front here, again, as mentioned previously, with a toggle rope attached onto the straps on each side. You see that just hangs around there. Very common to see, and in a couple of the relatively few pictures I've seen of this in use, this is carried around on the ammunition pouch like this. So I do hope you found it interesting looking at this. As I said earlier in the video, if anyone has any recollections of using this equipment, or particularly any photographs of it in use, I'd be interested to see. It would be very useful from a point of view of improving the setup to make it more accurate to how soldiers actually wore and set up the equipment for use in the field. I'd be very interested to see, and obviously any advice on that is much appreciated. As I say, there will be a part 2 to this, looking at the various components in more detail, so keep an eye out for that. And as I say, I do hope you found this interesting in the meantime. If you'd like to see part 2 or other topics like this, please do consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. And whether you're newly subscribing or you've previously subscribed, please do make sure you hit the little bell, the notification button down below, and that will of course alert you when I upload future videos. If you really like my uploads and you would like to support the channel, you can. Both Patreon and PayPal are linked down below. And as I always say, a massive thank you to everybody who supports the channel using those two methods. It really is greatly appreciated. As I always say, thank you all very much indeed. If you'd like to follow the channel on social media, you can. Facebook, Instagram and Twitter are all linked down below. And if you'd like to get in touch but you don't really use social media, there is of course an email address down there as well, as I mentioned earlier when asking if anyone does have photographs of this equipment in use, if you could send them over by email. That's probably the best way of getting in touch with me when sending photographs and that sort of thing. I do hope you found this interesting, as I say. That's everything for this video, so until next time, bye for now.